Just a big warm welcome to everybody. This is actually our sixth workshop. I know at the bottom of the slide it says number one, which I forgot to change. And we are so excited to be back after taking a month pause. And my name is Xoli, for those who don't know, one of the coordinators for ACA. And with me, I have Michelle. Michelle, you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm the other coordinator.
So today, actually, we're going to be exploring the waste management impact on climate change. And we can go to slide 2. Yay. So, today it's going to be fun. It's going to be interactive. And our intention is really just to break down and simplify the impact of waste on climate change by exploring the following. So the journey of waste to the landfill site, the difference between a transfer station and a landfill site, because sometimes people get them confused. Also looking at how long does waste take to decompose, and then linkages with waste and climate change, and then also ending up with looking at the waste hierarchy. Yeah. So this is just an overview of like how does waste management impact climate change. So our energy, production, and the products that we use, like things like water bottles, plastic, and also like how we actually manage all of that waste has a direct contribution to climate change. And that adds on to, the carbon-based particles that goes into the air, which actually which also affect, sorry, I'm going to rewind that, which contributes to our greenhouse effects. So we just wanted to give you that overview, but we later on during the workshop, we're really gonna dive more deeper into like how actually does waste management impact climate change. But before we get into that, we actually gonna go back to the, and this next slide is a question that we're gonna pose on you on, and you can use the chat, to answer this question, or if you want to share, you're welcome to unmute yourself and share. And the question really is like, what comes up for you, when you hear the word waste? And also just a reminder that there are no rights, there are no wrong. We just exploring together. Okay, Gabriel wrote rubbish. Emma says the parts of something that isn't used or is discarded. Yeah. Michelle, something which doesn't belong in the house. Okay.
Something that's no longer of use, I think would also be.
Anyone else? You're welcome to unmute yourself or use the chat. Anything. It could be a word also. Maybe it could be also something that you were once told, or something that you've learned from school, or your mom told you, or your aunt told you. Anything that comes up when you hear the word waste.
So something that comes up for me is like, it's more than the word waste, is like the word wasteful, and attached to that word for me is like excess and using too much stuff.
Cool. So using too much stuff.
Overconsumption.
Natasha says, oh, cool, Taiji, sorry. Can you repeat that?
Sorry, the last thing I was going to say is overconsumption.
Overconsumption, yes. Natasha says unwanted. Something that comes into my mind is like useless. Cool. I think those were great words. And so now I'm going to ask you if you to have a paper and a pen, because now we actually gonna explore together, you know, this thing called waste. And in your piece of paper, and you can write or you can draw. So I'm going to ask you, like, imagine that you just had a packet of chips. I mean, even if you're not a junk person like I am, imagining that you just had a packet of chips and you're done. And what do you do with a packet of chips? You know, what happens to it? So can you actually take time to, you can write down or you can draw the journey of that packet of chips, you know, from your hand to maybe landing up to the landfill site or wherever it lands actually. So we're gonna take like not 5 minutes. We're gonna take about 2 minutes, you know, for you to do this. And if you get stuck, please shout or send a message on the chat. So you can either draw it or you can write it down, you know, the journey of that packet of chips that we've just had to the landfill site. So how does it end up in the landfill site? Does it fly? You know, do you just try it on the ground? And I mean, again, there's no judgment in this. So it's just like simply us exploring like how we personally deal with waste. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we actually gonna share, you know, and again, I just want to remind you guys that there's no judgment. We're gonna go into breakout rooms in pairs, and you're just gonna take your time first. If you do have a picture or writing to show your partner your journey, and then just maybe take about 2 minutes.
I think there we go.
Okay.
Everyone's back.
Yeah, welcome back, everyone. I mean, I'm actually quite interested to hear like what came out that was a surprise for you, because for me in my group there were a lot of things that I was like, oh, I didn't think of that. So before we move on, just like maybe we can take like 2 minutes to debrief, like any aha moments or surprise or learnings also, you know, just from our sharings.
I was surprised by how many steps there were when I was writing them down, that it all seemed more simple when I wasn't thinking about it, but when I had to think about it, there was like, well, there's so many people involved and so many different steps. Yeah.
Yeah, and often like we don't think about that, eh? The like, yeah, all these different systems and people involved, and also funds, you know, because I'm sure like the truck drivers need to get paid, and that company also. Yeah, that's also very fascinating. Anyone else with a different perspective or anything, you know, that came up for you that you were surprised or?
That three of us in one group had a similar kind of journey for our chips packet. The journey that the three of us kind of came up with, Muketwa, Taiji and myself came up with, was, you know, the chips packet going to the landfill, but then drifting off and affecting some animal somewhere. And it was kind of like, it is kind of like really messed up to think that that's actually a reality that happens.
And I said, Gabriel, to the group after you left, that often, you know, like we think, oh, we send things to the landfill site and it ends up there. But there's so much that happens, you know, afterward that we don't see, like things being blown out into the air, into the ocean, yeah, and killing a lot of animals. Yeah, that was also, for me, another aha moment. I was like, hey, it was not part of my journey, but I know that it happens, but it was like, hey, that should be in my radar. That should be in my awareness. Yeah. Anything from your group, Michelle, Emma, Natasha, before we move on?
So for us, I think our discussion was mainly centered around like the sorting of waste. because we seem to believe that should be a step, but is it a reality? And then we put that thought against, like, on a single day, how much waste is actually collected in one single area. And then it just seemed a bit like mind-boggling whether or not people would sit and actually sort through that trash. And yeah.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. And now we're gonna actually move on to the next slide. Okay, cool. So now we're actually gonna explore that waste journey. And often, I mean, I'm also quite surprised that a lot of you know actually, you know, the journey. Because often, like, people have this assumption that, oh, you know, when I put my rubbish into the wheelie bin and the truck comes, that's where it ends. And there's not really a lot of awareness about where does it land and what happens to it, you know, where it goes. Yeah, I mean, this scenario is centered around like a shop, a grocery store, producing waste, and it will go into a rubbish bin, and then the truck will comes, and that truck often will go into a transfer station, which we will explore later on what does it mean. And then the waste there gets sorted, but then it ends up in a landfill site where it actually just sits there and sits, or like Gabriel has mentioned, like get blown away by the wind, ends up like on an ocean, or I don't know, in a farm somewhere, you know, where animals are endangered, where they could eat it and die. Yeah. So next slide. Cool. So before we move on, we just wanted to take time to really explain like the difference between a transfer station and a landfill site, because often like people think they are the same. And I think Taiji actually mentioned when presenting that you're also not aware, you know, of these names. So often when a truck comes into your house to collect your waste, it goes into a transfer station. And a transfer station really is very similar to a landfill, but the difference is that the waste sorted, you know, and separated before being transferred again to another area or a facility. And so waste will often get sorted according to like maybe like plastic bottles we put together. Organic waste, kitchen waste will be separated. And then all the things that can be recycled or reused or repurposed, those things will then get into a landfill site. But often a lot of transfer station actually don't do that. I mean, that's what they're supposed to do. But a lot of them, they do separate the waste, but then that waste again gets into a big truck and it all goes into a landfill site. And a landfill site is basically, I mean, the words that are used in South Africa, it's like it's a tip, it's a dump, it's a rubbish dump. I mean, for me, I always refer to it as a burial, a waste burial, because in there, it's just a space where waste is disposed. A landfill site is like an oldest and most common form of waste disposal. I mean, it's been used since the 1940s. Yeah, and in the past, you know, the waste was simply left in piles or thrown into like pits. Like they would dig holes and then they would just like shove everything, cover it. But yeah, so I mean, that's totally the difference between transfer station and a landfill site. So landfill site, they don't sort, they just dump. Transfer stations, the aim is to sort, and then whatever can be recycled, reused, or repurposed will then get into the landfill site. But now we're gonna take a look at the landfill site, just looking at the anatomy, like what really happens in the landfill site. So as I have mentioned before, like a landfill site is really just like a burial site with different like layers, you know, and often these layers, they represent years because, you know, if it's a new site, the waste will be the first layer. Often they would, I mean, now actually they're making them much more fancier where they putting like pipes and other resources to really speed up the decomposition process. But before, way back in the days, they would just like dig these holes, dump the waste, cover them, and then the following week the trucks will come again, and then that waste will just sit on top of that. And then it just gets compressed with no air circulating, nothing. And then they would just wait magically for the waste to decompose or disappear. Yeah. But I mean, that doesn't happen, because then on the next slide, you will see that when our waste, you know, the waste that we produced every single day, every single second gets to a landfill site, it really takes years, you know, to break down. I mean, here you will see like examples of a paper bag, you know, like you would think, oh, it's paper, it's compostable, but when it's in the landfill site, it takes a month, the whole month. A paper towel, I mean, it takes 2 to 4 weeks. But things like, you know, disposable diapers, I mean, if you think of how many babies are in this world and using those disposable diapers, I mean, I think like one of those takes 550 years. A plastic bag, you know, also we use plastics all the time. It takes about 200 to 1,000 years, you know, and this depends on the thickness of the plastic. Styrofoam cups, like 50 years. Shoes, you know, 25 to 40 years. I mean, milk cartons, it takes about 5 years. And I mean, I know in Cape Town, we currently have 3 big landfill sites. And the last time I actually had a chat with somebody from the city of Cape Town, they were actually very worried that most of those landfill sites, they're getting full. And often what happens when the landfill site is full, the city will then have to go and scout, you know, for land to build another burial site for waste. And for me, it's always like mind-boggling for me. You know, we live in a country with a lot of disparities and inequalities, and people wanting land, you know, to live, to build homes. And here we are, you know, looking for land to dump our waste. Yeah, it's quite sad. Okay. But anyway, so we're gonna move on to the next slide. And now often like maybe you're asking yourself, so what does this has to do with climate change? You know? And I think, as I had explained on that first slide when we started, is that because we are a country that is like to consume, like we buy things every second, we produce things. And when these things are produced, you know, they use petroleum to burn them, and that actually has a big contribution to the greenhouse effect, which is a big contributor in climate change. Yeah. So moving on to the next slide. And here it goes in detail. If you look at going back to the landfill site, you know, also we know that methane is also a gas that contributes to the greenhouse gases. The carbon storage in landfill sites the energy also that it takes to produce in production. So all of that also contributes to climate change. Also often, like, people would say, oh, I'm recycling, therefore I'm helping. But if you look at recycling, I mean, when you recycle, it's a big production actually. So that also creates a lot of emissions because the energy, that it takes to melt down those plastics and the metals, they also produce gases that contributes to climate change. Yeah. Okay, so what can we do? Yeah, and this is the crux, so often, like, we, in schools also or in our families, we are often encouraged to recycle, or to reuse, or to reduce our waste. But if you look at, I mean, this is a hierarchy that is designed to really look at how we can reduce our waste into zero. Yeah. And it's upside down because in our world, like, we often go like, okay, let's dispose, let's get into the bin because it's going to disappear and it's not going to be my issue. But for us to really solve this issue, we need to be looking at how we can actually reduce our waste, but also refuse waste, because you always have an option, And often, like, I would make an example, with the kids that I teach, and I'm like, if you go to Pick and Pay, or you go to ShopRite, for example, and you go buy carrots, and you have carrots that are beautiful, they might be orange, but they package in plastic, and then you have carrots, that, not in a plastic. Which one are you going to choose? And often the kids will say, like, the one in a plastic bag because it looks good, it's beautiful, it's got a plastic, it's orange, it's clean, without thinking that they're not going to eat the package, and that package will, end up in a landfill site or in an ocean or somewhere being eaten by an animal, and that animal dying. So it's looking at how we can actually create that mindfulness or mindset of refusing to buy or to create waste, or if not, like, seeing if you can reduce, like, what are other ways that you can reduce. Like, if you go shopping, instead of buying a plastic, like, taking your own bag, like your own shopping bag. That way you are reducing your waste, or refusing, to buy or to add on to this crisis. And then also, they also saying, like, we also need to look at ways to, incentivize people to stop, like, producing waste. Maybe, like, for example, like, imagine if you go shopping to ShopRite and you bring your bag, and then you get a sticker. Maybe they have a sticker session, like a sticker thing where you get a sticker, and then at the end of the month, that could be turned into a voucher that you can use to buy more veggies. There's like selected items that you can buy, so that people are encouraged, to again have that mindset and be mindful about, I'm not going to contribute to waste. Then also, then going back to the manufacturers, because yes, civil society contributes, but the bigger contributors are those big companies, that are creating those plastic bottles and banning those fossil fuels. So it's also finding ways for them to look at, like, sustainable packaging, or ways that they can, design products that don't end up in landfill sites. And I know, like, in the in the coffee industry, a lot of cafes now are using compostable cups, you know, or also like encouraging people to bring their own cups, reusable cups, and really incentivizing them in doing so. Like you'll get a 2 rand off, you know, if you bring your own cup rather than like buying a coffee in their own cup. And then if we cannot do that, then it's then how we can reuse, you know. So choosing things or buying things that have package that can be reusable, like glass jars, you know. And then if we fail then to do that, because sometimes it's impossible, and then we look at the recycling option, you know. And especially around our kitchen waste, I know Gabriel is aiming to start a compost bin, and that will be his way of recycling. And at home I have worms. So my worms, I can help you guys. I can help you to get there. Yeah. But I mean, you actually do something, you're helping. So recycling, and then we also then need to look at like how we can regulate the disposal. So maybe, you know, if Michelle says her one died, yeah, I can help you, Michelle, also, don't worry, you know. And imagine like if instead of the trucks, the rubbish bin coming once a week, and it comes once a month. And I'm sure by that people will be forced to look at alternative ways of really like reducing and reusing their own waste. Yeah. Next slide. Cool. And I mean, yeah, and I hope this the workshop was very insightful, and also like a reminder that we were really going back to basics. So it was not to look at like the science or on how really the waste impacts climate change, but just really taking time to break down, you know, like what we know, and so that on Wednesday, which I'm very excited about, when we have the experts, you know, and you have that basic information and you can engage, you know, with the panelists, because on Wednesday we're going to have a webinar where we're going to have the experts, like somebody from the City of Cape Town from waste management, and one of our youth ambassador who will really be diving deep into this topic.